If I am ever to get this series finished, I need to start doing 10 games per episode on practically all the platforms that I had any more days of experience than what you could count with your other hand. So, from the 4th Windows episode onwards, it'll be another 10 games per episode, and today we're starting off with a game I never understood properly, but I always thought it pretty cool. MDK from Shiny Entertainment, 1997. For a short while, I had this game in my collection and tried to play it a few times, but at the time, I couldn't get through even the practice area for some reason. Of course, having had a version with no instructions manual of any sort, I wasn't really prepared to use my head to figure out what to do, and MDK is an old school game in the way that it doesn't quite hold your hand through every little bit you walk over. I wasn't used to this sort of a game with all kinds of new things in it. So it took me close to 20 years to finally get back to MDK, as I bought it again from GOG.com and had a closer look at how the game works. As I originally suspected when I first got my hands on the game, I knew I would enjoy it once I finally figured it out. Although MDK is basically just another third-person platforming shooter, at the time of release it was huge. It was spectacular. MDK is science fiction action with humor, with not much of a plotline, but for the time, the main thing was to have a pretty 3D game with something unique going on for it, which MDK really handled well. Everybody at the time was waiting for a new and improved Tomb Raider, but MDK was really the game no one expected to wish for instead. The main trick in the game is the sniper mode, in which you can zoom up 100 times, and you can use various kinds of ammunition at any given point, provided you have something more than your basic bullets. You also have a ribbon parachute which can be used indefinitely and perform nice floaty tricks with it. Unfortunately, I haven't really had enough of time with MDK since returning to it not more than 7 years ago to make too much progress, but it is a very enjoyable game and I wish I was able to play it using the proper hardware of the time it was designed for. But the GOG install version is good enough for a blast every now and then. Next we have probably one of the most unlikely games that I happen to enjoy, along with my cousin. It's the first game in a series of Russian truck driving simulators known to us Europeans and Americans as Hard Truck. I can't remember exactly how did we end up having this game in our collective conscience, but considering that we were not exactly fans of this genre later on, Road to Victory was played a surprising amount during a period of a couple of years, somewhere around the turn of the millennium. The majority of time we spent with Hard Truck was driving along the long single route roads, listening to a compilation of The Doors, which I had just bought back then. Whenever it was raining on any given route, we'd start up Riders on the Storm and let the mood carry it out. For obvious reasons, I'm not gonna put Riders on the Storm on this video, but it has a strong connection to this game for me. There are some delivery missions in the game as well as circuit racing, but the way the truck controls is not exactly the most comfortable style for racing. The game is supposed to be played with an analog controller of some sort, but I don't recall us ever having gotten around to playing Hard Truck that way, and I can't imagine my PlayStation racing wheel being compatible with the old PC game. Hard Truck Road to Victory is a relatively difficult game to find these days, but if you do, you might be glad to know that it actually works surprisingly well on a Windows 10. Maybe even 11, although I haven't tested it there. You just have to run it in a compatibility mode and a suitable screen mode. I cannot, however, recommend it all that highly, because truck driving simulators have come a long, and I do mean a long way since 1998, But what this one offers more than any of the more modern ones is nostalgia. One of my more peculiar PC gaming memories was recently evoked of a point-and-click adventure that my brother had bought for himself for some reason on what I remember as being some of his final active days as a gamer. The game in question was the second and the last in Infogrames' duo of Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu games, Prisoner of Ice. And for some reason I remember playing it on a Windows-operated PC, even though the game was DOS compatible. Perhaps it might have been my brother's PC from 1995-96, but I can't remember exactly. And I don't know why, but I've found Prisoner of Ice interesting enough to complete it once and never touched it since. But it made a lasting impression, perhaps more because of the way I got to play it than how it was played. The game has its own peculiarities which make it a memorable experience. It has these weird timed puzzles which will end the game if you can't solve them, for one. Also, for the entire length of the game, there seemed to be a sort of eerie feel to it, perhaps largely thanks to its voice acting.
Operation Polaris completed. 2 crates on board. Bjorn Hansen recovered. Mental state critical.
Having gotten used to games like this mostly with LucasArts and Sierra's adventure games, which I have yet to mention in any of these episodes for a reason, Prisoner of Ice felt comfortable enough and took a couple of days to finish without a walkthrough. This was my first of not that many experiences with the whole Cthulhu mythos. And to this day I can't say I'm a big fan of the whole thing, but after playing Dark Corners of the Earth some years later, I could definitely see how that might interest some people. If adventure games didn't take so much time to play, I might actually take the time to play the first of Infogrames' Cthulhu games, Shadow of the Comet, as well. Digging this one up for this episode was a good reminder though.
13th of January, 1937.
As far as you're concerned, Ryan, Operation Polaris is over. But while you await your repatriation to Washington, you'll continue to hold the rank of...
First-person shooters was really the thing for me before it even became the big thing that it did with the likes of Medal of Honor and Call of Duty. For me, the most memorable first-person shooters were the silly and cheap independent games like Christmas Carnage, Chex Quest, and this one here, Bad Toys, from a Czechian team called T-Bow Software, released in 1996 for the Windows 3.1 and upwards. I never actually got to play the full version of Bad Toys, but I played the demo from one of those PC Gamer type magazine discs quite a few times back in the day. The thing that always tickled me about Bad Toys was its hand-drawn style graphics, which almost felt like you were playing a first-person shooter in the world of Beavis and Butthead, but not exactly. I can't remember any other first-person shooter that even made the attempt to look something like this, which really made it stand out. T-Bow Software's website is still around, and from there you are supposedly able to register Bad Toys even now for only $9.99, which could be considered a bargain if you take into consideration the value of other PC games of that age nowadays. But, you know, my nostalgia for Bad Toys is limited to the playable 3-level demo version, so that's what I'm happy to have and enjoy. I've always been a sucker for good pinball games, but back in the late 90s there weren't many noteworthy pinball games for Microsoft Windows operating systems yet. So what eventually happened was Microsoft themselves released the first proper pinball simulator for the OS in 1998. This was called Microsoft Pinball Arcade, a collection of 7 real pinball tables licensed by Gottlieb from 1931 to 1992. The nice thing about this one is that if you have the original CD-ROM and the equipment to run it, you can even run it on Windows 11 without the need to use the compatibility mode. However, it doesn't run smoothly on a modern Windows, so you're still better off playing it on an old Windows 95-98 machine. Back in the day, Microsoft Pinball Arcade was one of a very small number of pinball simulators to feature real-life pinball tables, and from what I can tell, the first one to feature tables from as far back as 1931. Having never really seen more than a couple of actual pinball tables up to around the turn of the millennium, the clunky old mechanical tables were really fun and interesting to see in the game. The only table I didn't really enjoy at all in the collection was the newest one, Cue Ball Wizard from 1992, mostly because of the awkward manner the score screen was overlaid sort of awkwardly halfway over the top area of the table, so you couldn't see either the table or the score screen perfectly well. For the few times I played Microsoft Pinball Arcade some 25 years ago, I did enjoy it for what it was. Not exactly a pinball simulator to knock off pinball dreams and fantasies off their pedestal, but a new approach to pinball simulators to shed some light into the history of pinball games for the uninitiated, such as myself. And of course, there have been numerous better pinball games released since, making Microsoft Pinball Arcade basically obsolete, but it's a relic I like to keep on my Windows 98 PC and play it for a while whenever I decide to dust off the old block. We must have at least one puzzle game on the menu today, so I'm choosing one that can act as many puzzle games in one neat package. From 1996 to 1997, Nowhere and Smart Games developed a series of puzzle minigame collections, each of them more or less titled Smart Games Challenge something or other. The one I played the most, merely for the reason of it being the only one available for me at the time, was Smart Games Puzzle Challenge 2 from 1997, which has been considered as the best of the bunch. Well, I wouldn't know about that, but I did play it quite a lot, at least some of it, and thought it pretty good fun. There are 20 different games within Smart Games 2 itself, all of which consist of a vast number of challenges of their own. According to Moby Games, Smart Games 2 includes over 1,400 puzzles, so if you ever completed all of it, that could be called a puzzle game obsession. The ones I remember playing the most are Down and Across, which is a word game of sorts, Pick-Packs, which is like a variation of Tangram, a geometric shapes puzzle thing, Say What, in which you combine audio clips to form full sequences, and Polf, which is a weird combination of pool and golf. Say What was by far my most favorite game in the collection, and even that game I never actually fully completed. The way Smart Games works is, you get a combined score from all the games, and the game saves all your progress in every area after completing any little thing. There seems to be some sort of an incentive to continue playing the game, if only for the thrill of beating your friends at it, but of course, as with all puzzle games, you do get to feel like you've achieved something just by figuring out how to play some of these games, not to mention getting better at them. Smart Games 2 was originally released for the Windows 3.1 and above, and it was one of my most revisited games until Windows XP came along, with easier internet access capabilities, but still to this day, I feel a great sense of nostalgia whenever I see the game in action, or mere screenshots of it. The genre of crosshair hunting games became a popular thing in late 1997 with the release of Deer Hunter, published by WizardWorks. Of that particular game series, I never really got into all that much, but there were a few parody games that I enjoyed a few times and still find memorable. I tried to include Prairie Dog Hunt Pro into this list today, which was released further back in 1995, but I couldn't get it working properly on anything I tried it on. The game I did get working is Deer Avenger from 1998, which plays much like the classic Deer Hunter games. This time though, you take the role of a deer named Bambo. See what they did with that? And you hunt for deer hunters by following their tracks around dense forests and make human-like noises to attract them.
It's showtime.
As I said, this is more my kind of a thing than the actual Deer Hunter because it's a parody. Not only that, but it's a rather well-made parody that I always thought surpassed the playability of the original Deer Hunter.
Well, this should even the odds.
Obviously, it's not as realistically styled as Deer Hunter, but rather cartoony in appearance and comical in showing all the stereotyped human male hunter characteristics.
Circle. Find me
Sure, it's not the most praised of games, but I mean, are any of these early hunting games really? Should they even? Well, Dear Avenger was considered good enough an idea to spawn 4 sequels, the last 2 of which were released in 2001. Make of that what you will. To me, Dear Avenger is one of the best representatives of obscure PC games from the late 90s, and it's certainly a game that wouldn't have worked on any console back then.
Alright, blew that one. He'll be on his cell phone calling a helicopter to fly him out of here in no time.
Now it's time to whip out a game that I always thought was one of the coolest things I ever played on my Windows 3.11. The Adventures of MicroMan by Brian Goebel was released as shareware on April Fool's Day 1993. And as these things often go, I never saw more than the first episode of the game. The registered version had a second adventure, and then there was a third one in the making which never got completed. You could consider MicroMan something like Metroidvania before people started calling these games that. In all honesty, it's a fairly basic action platformer in today's standards, but in 1993, The Adventures of MicroMan was an achievement. The way the game was made only enhances its legend, although I couldn't be bothered any less about that sort of thing. Just the fact that it was the biggest game I had ever seen and played in Windows 3 and boasted of great animations and sound effects was a serious step into making Windows an actually potential arcade-like gaming platform. I probably didn't get to play The Adventures of MicroMan until 1996 or 97 because I didn't have a PC until then. And of course, by that time MicroMan was helplessly outdated. But I still enjoyed it. 26 years later, I still haven't played the second part of the game, and I doubt I ever will. But that doesn't matter, since the nostalgia is in that shareware version anyway. I was originally planning on having another game on the 9th spot, but I didn't want to use the unsuitable for children tag on this video, so I chose differently. Sentinel Returns. I didn't realize until making this episode now is one of the rare games in my collection of which I have all the published versions of in my collection, although it's of course a little bit easier to achieve than most other games since it was only ever released for Windows and PlayStation. The original Sentinel is an 8-bit classic puzzler with 3D polygon graphics, but I cannot actually mention that in any context because I have no actual nostalgia for it. Although I did write a comparison of it sometime during the first years of the comparison blog. This sequel, though, is a game I played more than I played the original Sentinel while making the comparison. Easily more on my PC than on PlayStation, though. Sentinel Returns has the exact same idea as the original, but is perhaps a bit easier to get into thanks to the mouse controls and more instantaneous gameplay. If you have never played either game, it's a surreal first-person puzzle game in which you need to build and absorb energy in the form of trees, boulders and robot hulls, all of which have their own specific energy costs. The idea is to reach the near vicinity of a sentinel that watches over each area and get yourself just enough above it to be able to absorb it. Yeah, trust me, it sounds more surreal than it actually plays, but you would really have to play it a few times to get into it. The only enemy in the game is the Sentinel, which can absorb any form of energy in its field of vision, including yourself. Apparently there are 650 levels in Sentinel Returns, which is less than what the original game has, but plenty enough to be still pretty much impossible to complete in one lifetime. You either love it or hate it, but I would certainly recommend everybody to at least put a few hours into it before deciding whether to like it or not. We end this episode with a properly big one, and it's one of the first games I ever bought into my PC games collection. It's the point-and-click adventure classic Blade Runner from Westwood Studios and published by Virgin Interactive in 1997. Saying it's a properly big one means many things in this case, and it's impossible to deal with this one as briefly as most other games I've featured in the series so far. To put things in some perspective, Blade Runner the movie was adapted from the dystopian sci-fi novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, 1968, which differed notably from the movie. The movie itself divided opinions, largely thanks to its ambiguous ending, but also because of its voiceover-style storytelling in its original theatrical cut. The director's cut not only drops the voiceover, but also changes the ending, leaving things more open for interpretation.
Animal sales was a profitable and prestigious business since most real animals had died out after the Terran War. There were plenty of electric ones, though, powered by rechargeable batteries. No self-respecting human would own one of those frauds.
Both the novel and the film follow a bounty hunter by the name of Rick Deckard, whose job it is to find and kill 6 escaped Nexus 6 model androids, whose own identity becomes questionable as the plot
Big
moves
caliber,
along.
possibly off-world combat weaponry. Ballistics might give me a fix on it.
The movie is a visual feast and has an extremely fitting Vangelis soundtrack, but absurdly, the soundtrack was the basis for the first computer game ever to bear the name Blade Runner. Oh well. The 1997 game was big before it came out because everybody knew it was going to be huge. Just seeing screenshots of the game in magazines sent sci-fi nerds all over the world into hysterics, as they showed pixel-perfect renditions of familiar scenes from the movie. The spinner flying over dystopian Los Angeles with the supersized electronic billboards, the voice conf machine, and all such things. But when the game was finally released, the size of it was astounding for years. And for a good reason. The content was spread over 4 CDs, and this was, for the most part, not much more than a point-and-click adventure. Sure, after a while the game throws some action sequences at you, but there is a lot of full-motion videos here as well as dialogue, which take a lot of space.
Hallelujah.
Don't get too excited.
The great thing about the 1997 Blade Runner game is that you don't play as Rick Deckard. That would have been a mistake. You play as a rookie Blade Runner called Ray McCoy, who is dealing with largely similar issues as Rick Deckard, but in your own specific ways. You have the same tools in use as Deckard in the movie, which is really the most important aspect of getting a game based on the movie properly right. But the real party trick in this game is, there are 13 different endings, which are influenced by your actions and decisions throughout the game. To me, it's really the first and one of the rare cases of a computer game being better than the movie it was based on. Although I'm happy to own an actual boxed version of the game, I'm also glad that Blade Runner was finally given a digital release a couple of years ago on GOG.com, and there's even a remastered version of it now, which reportedly isn't as good as the original. But do yourselves a favor and get the original version from GOG. I'm not sure if that's the only possible way to play the game at the moment, but it is certainly the most convenient way, and I couldn't recommend it any higher.